Hello, I'm making this video having just taught a 3-hour session on literacy in response to the excellent feedback I got. I asked participants who were trainee teachers to rate me on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 was awesome and 1 was rubbish. And unusually, the spread of feedback I got was from 2 to 5. Normally I get an average of around 4. Here I wasn't far off that. But there were lots of people who I hadn't satisfied, and that's really valuable feedback for you as a teacher. So I'm doing this in response to that. Hopefully you'll find everything in it useful. These are the 10 things that I'll be talking about. So one of the even better ifs I got was that I should be much more explicit about what makes good literacy. So in a 3-hour session, I found it difficult to cover all of these 10 topics. So here you are. This is the 10. I'll go through them in that order so that you can skip ahead in the video to the section that interests you. And I'll also break the video up into little chunks and publish them separately, so you can just jump into the one you want if you wish. Okay, number 1 on my list is the least effective in improving the standard of your students' work, but it's also the easiest one to do and the easiest one to get right. So, for example, spelling should be something your students get right in the classroom, and it's easy to give them subject-specific vocabulary that you want them to get right, and then you need to patrol the room to make sure that's what they're doing. You need to insist on the right spellings. And then obviously, if you just insisted on these two, capitals and full stops, it would improve the work in, I would say, most average students' exercise books. You find that they miss those out. And it's not because they don't know. You don't have to teach them this stuff. You simply have to patrol the room and make sure that your students are using them. This here is something that any external observer, Ofsted or SLT, will be impressed with if your students do regularly and accurately. So you can jump off the literacy bandwagon if you wish right here, having mastered this feature. Genuinely, if most of your students did all of these and you were rigorous about introducing the subject vocabulary and making sure it was spelled right all the time, your books would be better than most other teachers in the school, possibly including my own. It's not easy to do this. This technique works with any subject. Simply give your students these 6 connectives and you will dramatically improve not just the way they write, but the way they think. You can do it as a starter activity or with written work or with speaking and listening. So, for example, because the heat was applied to the material, the molecules began to move faster and the material expanded. Therefore, when we heated a ball of steel that fit through a ring, we found it no longer could once heated. However, once it had been cooled down in water, it reverted to its original size. Moreover, this was accomplished very quickly, so we can see that molecules change their state very quickly. Consequently, metal can expand and contract very quickly because it is a solid. Although this works very well for metal, it is much more difficult to control with gases. So you can see how just following this through, whatever your subject, students will have to think in incredible detail to link these together. And if they can do that, they're speaking in paragraphs. Anything that a child can speak, they can therefore do in writing. And obviously the reverse is also true. If they can't do it in speech, they probably can't do it in writing. And therefore you must teach connectives. Normally I just have these 5, but I've introduced this one because your middle ability and lower ability students will insist on using also very frequently, and this makes their writing boring, tedious, and an examiner will automatically think they're stupid. So there you go, an alternative to also. I only allow 1 also per piece of writing, but then I'm an English teacher. Okay, now we move on to writing itself, and I've just spoken about connectives which show you how paragraphs might be constructed. There are in fact 3 things to teach about paragraphs, and they're the 3 T's. Change of paragraph for a change of topic, for a change of time, and a change of talk. So if you're an English teacher, time, topic and talk is vital. Probably teaching any other subject, topic will come up a lot, but obviously you're also likely to be sequencing things, so changes of time are also relevant. You need to be explicit about connectives in order to get students to link their paragraphs together. Next, you want their paragraphs to be well written, and the simplest instruction to give them is simply to start each sentence with a different word. You'll be amazed at how sophisticated this forces their writing to be, just because they can't start with the same word all the time. They have to change each and every one. Typically what happens is they start starting sentences with connectives, and this forces them to use complex ideas at the beginning of their sentence, and they find imaginative ways to finish it. And then finally, if you're educating your students to be literate, they need to be writing in different genres. So a typical history lesson might be, okay, go away and write a newspaper article about the Battle of Hastings. Well, that's useless unless you've taught the actual genre to the students. So you'd have to talk about headlines and bylines, how they quote, how quotations are introduced with a colon, how a writer will try and include quotations from different points of view, how they build towards a climax, how the writing never has a conclusion, how in newspaper articles you never put the reporter at the scene. Many students do it as though it's a live news report on TV. So you can see all sorts of particular aspects of the genre need to be taught, and obviously that's the subject of a different video. But if you truly wanted your students to be brilliant at writing, in your subject they have to write in different and interesting ways. Discussions, arguments, persuasive pieces, newspaper articles, diaries, all kinds of different ways of writing. If you do that, students will become better writers. Right, let's find out the next technique. David Didow has this wonderful observation that practice does not make perfect, practice makes permanent. And what I'm getting at here is that most students simply don't bother checking their work, and what they do is repeat what they always do, which is inaccurate spelling, random capitals, full stops when they can be bothered, loads and loads of sentences separated by commas. And one of the ways round that is not to mark that in their books once you take the books in, but to do it in real time, do it now. So the first bit of advice I've got is patrol the room. Whenever you've got students writing, break that fifth wall, the imaginary wall in the classroom. So if this screen is your classroom, this is you at the front, and then there's this imaginary wall that comes around here, which defines our teaching space, and we rarely move into these areas of the room. However, once students are working, you need to do that. Take a pink highlighter pen. I just use pink because that's what we do in school. So pink highlighter pen, and narrate what you want. So Jacob has underlined his title. Jacob, you haven't spelt diffusion correctly. It's on the board. Please make sure you get it right. And by narrating what you want from the students, they'll tune into what you're saying and correct themselves. So Jessica's already finished the first paragraph. She's started a new line for the next paragraph. Well done, Jessica. Thank you very much. Enid has started her new paragraph with the connective, well done. She's got therefore, and she's used a comma after it. Of course, those you might think are English type examples. It doesn't have to be English. You could be narrating stuff that you want in maths. So, so-and-so has shown her workings really clearly. Well done, thank you. And you just narrate the stuff that you want. The pink highlighter pen is for every time you notice a mistake, and you simply highlight it in pink, and the student knows, because this is your routine, that they must correct it. You can wander around again later and see who's not managed to correct it, because that student possibly needs your help, and if there are a number of students making the same mistake, which they haven't been able to correct, you know that you must stop the lesson straight away and reteach that bit, or get another student to reteach it for you. The final advantage of this is it's feedback that comes to the student at exactly the right time. It comes at them now, at the time when they're making the mistakes. It takes no lesson preparation, it takes no planning, and you could legitimately do this every single lesson as soon as the students are engaged in any kind of work that you want them to do. So that's a top tip for you. Make the students proofread, and proofread the work yourself. You might think it's very difficult to teach the skill of reading in your subject area. However, I don't think it is. So there's some simple things that you can do, whether it's school policy or not. You can insist that all students have a book. Therefore, they might read it at any time when you simply don't want to differentiate by giving them extension tasks. And you might decide to give them a break from their learning for 5 minutes and they should read a book. The more times that you find ways of getting them to use the book, the easier it is. All students should read out loud. It astonishes me how few students actually are required to read out loud, and typically we scaffold work for our classes by reading out loud to the students. But the secret message to them is that, well, the teacher will read out loud, so I can sit and think about whatever I want. I don't actually have to follow what the teacher is saying in any way. I won't be found out, and then when I have to do some sort of activity, I'll put my hand up and say, please miss, can you help me? So I don't do that. I get students to read out loud. If it's a particularly long text, I might alternate with them and read sentences myself. Give the students whole sentences or whole paragraphs to read. The added advantage of that for you as a teacher is not only do you force your students to practice reading, you can work out what their problems are and intervene. So they might stumble over a word. You can nominate someone as the word expert in the class, and that student who's struggling can call upon that expert. Can you help me with this word, please? And the expert will read it out for them. The crucial thing there, of course, is that the student who's asked for help has to then read the word and read it out correctly. Don't let them skip that stage, because many of them will try to. A further advantage is they won't know what a word means, and so you simply blank it out and get the student to put a word in its place. So if they didn't know what read meant, you'd blank that out, they'd read the rest, all students, something out loud, and they'd use the context. Well, what do they do out loud? What might that word be? And 90% of the time, they'll get a word that would make sense in that gap, and that actually is a very close approximation to the word that's missing. It's really important to teach them the strategy of reading what's gone before and what's gone afterwards. Then this bit of advice I gave, and I'll keep coming back to it really. Brainscape is an absolutely brilliant online facility, great for teaching key subject terms. So whatever your subject, there's always specialist terms, and effectively what you've got here are flashcards. So the term itself appears on one side and then the definition on the other, and students simply self-test and rate their performance. It's a fabulous way to learn. If you're not sure about it, you can find Brainscape on this channel. Have a look at how it works, or bypass that. Just go straight to the website, Brainscape. And then finally, underline keywords in questions. You'll often find that students don't answer a question fully, even where they've got all the subject knowledge. And it's really crucial for you to explore and model with the students how to find the keywords, the ones that tell them what the topic is, and even more importantly, those command keywords that tell them what to do. So there you have it, 4 simple strategies to improve the reading of your students in your class, no matter what the school policy is. Okay, well, what do I mean about student talk? I don't mean group work here. By student talk, I mean their ability to speak in sentences. And the more you insist on this, the better your students will become in your subject, not just in literacy. If you are lucky enough to have the privilege to go into other people's lessons, as I do, you will find that a lot of times students get away with simply giving 1 or 2 word answers. They're not made to speak in sentences. And you can understand this when you watch teachers trying to get through the subject content, and questioning is often just a case of checking understanding. And in order to check the understanding, well, actually a 1 or 2 word answer might do. So in a languages lesson we might ask, does this verb take avoir or être? Oh, it takes être, sir. But equally the student might say être, and that would be enough of an answer. However, over time, this doesn't develop the student's language, and what I want to get to here is moving away from just speaking in sentences into speaking in paragraphs. Once you do that, you become increasingly sophisticated. If you're in the longer version of this video, then I've already modelled that in the section on connectives. The other thing this will do is it will change the way you teach. You'll start asking questions that need to be asked in sentences, and there'll be fewer questions which are simply recall. For example, you'll start asking students to explain. So why is 3x greater than 3y? Or why does heat change the state of a property? Or why does the verb ending need to change when we're changing the person from I to we? You'll get much more sophisticated questioning and therefore more sophisticated thinking from your students and more sophisticated answers. Once they've started to think in that way, it's because you've changed your thinking, and then it's a short step to getting them to link sentences together in paragraphs. If they can do that orally, they'll do it brilliantly in writing, and they'll succeed spectacularly in your subject. Okay, show and tell is one of the key things that I do with my students that guarantees success, even if everything else in the lesson is falling apart. So there's always an activity that you ask your students to do. Let's imagine for a moment that it's a writing activity. You will all have some sort of computer set up at the front of your room that connects to a projector. Therefore, each and every time, without exception, that you get students writing, put one of them at the computer as a typist. That means you always have an example of the student's work to assess. You don't have to choose the best student in the class. That's often not the best example to put up. Often the best example is a middle ability student who's going to make typical mistakes that 10 other students in the class are also going to make. That's gold dust to you because you can teach from it. You suffer a massive disadvantage, most of you do as teachers, because you are experts in your subject, and you can never write as badly as an average student. You can never perform the work as badly, and therefore it's really difficult for you to anticipate the kinds of mistake your kids will make. However, you don't have to anticipate it if it's on the projector. It's simply there, you look at it, you discuss it as a class, or you simply teach the children from it. This means that you always assess the work Every lesson there's some kind of assessment, and you do it now, it is live, and therefore it arrives exactly at the time that students need it. In other subjects where you might not be writing, you've got a camera. I would imagine 90% of you own a camera phone, or an iPad or some kind of device with a camera on it. It takes no effort to photograph a student's work and email it to yourself. Yes, that might take 30 seconds of your time, literally, photographing it, emailing it, opening it up on the screen and showing it. It's not difficult to do, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful, because everything you put on the screen will be directly relevant to your students right now, because it's live, it's the work they're doing right now. If it's successful, then brilliant, you get to model what success looks like, and where it isn't successful, you get to model how to improve it. This has another huge advantage on the behaviour for learning of your students, because they are always accountable and they always know that you are going to potentially put their work up. They always want to do well. And to see how this works in practice, you just have to get a middle ability kid typing, and they will write 2 or 3 times as much as they would in their exercise book, because they are desperate not to be seen to underachieve in front of their class. This again is gold dust to you, because it changes the environment of your lesson and you are in charge of a really positive ethos. So, show and tell, the best way to assess, the best way to make students accountable, and the best way to work out what it is they don't know. Okay, this is tip number 9, and therefore incredibly powerful. It's the skill that I see done least well in schools. When I talk to teachers, they all believe that they do model, they think it's a skill of theirs, and I don't want to be patronising, but actually they haven't fully thought through, most teachers, how that model should be used with the students. So the first thing I'd say is that your model needs to aim really high. It needs to aim to get 100%. So let's imagine a GCSE class. Your model is going to be A star. And then you have to really explicitly think about what's in your model that makes it A star. It's no good writing something of 500 words that's brilliant when your students only have time to write 250 in the exam. So it has to match. Make it match what the students actually can do. There are some subjects, however, where the GCSE is limiting. I'd certainly say modern foreign languages is limiting. The GCSE doesn't require an awful lot of language. They don't have to use many tenses. I think it's 3, and they certainly don't have to use many examples of that tense. I would suggest that in your teaching you go beyond GCSE, especially if you want them to opt for A-level and succeed at A-level when they get there. So some subjects, like modern foreign languages, you want to teach them more than the GCSE. Other subjects, for example, if they're writing in PE, you don't. You want to teach them exactly what the exam requires and get 100% in the exam. There's no point teaching them to do better, because it doesn't benefit them. Whereas, of course, a proficiency in a language will benefit them much more. And in your heart of hearts, you know that a GCSE isn't actually that useful as a measure of how good someone is in a language. So, next we get this problem. Typically, teachers, in my experience, you might be different, tend to give students the model after they've had a go and after they've already made loads of mistakes. And then we give them the model and say, oh, by the way, this is what you should have done. Well, I'm going to suggest that you reverse that. Give them a model that is 100% first. Teach from that. Explore why it's 100%. Then get them to redo that question with that exact model, so they've got to try and reproduce it. You'll find for many students that's very difficult, even though they've got the answer first. It's not cheating, because by the time they get into the exam, it's the 100% answer you want them to be able to give. And then as they become increasingly good, you change the context. So this is what we wrote about in history with the Battle of Hastings. Right, now let's see what made that 100%. Good. I'm going to give you a similar question, but this time it's going to be on the Battle of Agincourt, let's say. Apply the same principles, show me what you can do. So, give them the model first. Well, once you've done the model, you need to give students a mark scheme. And that has to be in language that the students understand. Most mark schemes I see delivered to students are exactly as you find them in the exam mark scheme. This is a wasted opportunity because even if you give a mark scheme to teachers, they'll often be puzzled about what particular bits mean, and actually you want to simplify it, so you just focus on the key differences between the grade boundaries, the key skills, and you must translate it into language that your students can understand. If you simply give them the mark scheme as it stands, it's not going to be good enough. Why? Well, because you need to see how that mark scheme can be used to get the 100%, how that mark scheme can be used with the model answer that you've done. And it's no good having a really explicit model answer if the mark scheme's too difficult to understand. That needs to be explicit also. And then finally, this bit here I hardly ever see teachers do. There are lots of rules that aren't in the mark scheme. However, they are in your understanding of what makes a good answer. And you will spot this for yourself. If you write an exam answer that you think should score 100%, then compare it to the mark scheme, you'll find there's lots of stuff you're doing that isn't in the mark scheme, but nevertheless you value. I could go through examples there, but I think that would be another video. But if you want to see how that works, visit some of my AQA videos or IGCSE. So I'm an English teacher with an English degree, and it is impossible for me to get 100% on an English GCSE without reading the mark scheme, because there are so many rules which are hidden. I'll put a link in this video so you can see that if you want. But this is incredibly powerful. It's the stuff that you know, that you do because you're an expert, but you're not explicit yet about telling the kids how to do it. That's going to move their performance massively. Right, here it is at last. Congratulations if you've managed to get to the end of the long version of this video. So now we have the model. How on earth do we teach from it? There are lots of ways, but I'm just going to give you 4 here. Reconstruct it from the key vocabulary. So, call students up. They get to highlight a particular word, maybe 1 per line or 2 per sentence, however you want to do it. And this is the key vocabulary that they think is most important. Once that's up, get rid of the rest of the answer, and they just have that key vocabulary. Can they reconstruct it in the order in which the vocabulary appeared? And you'll find that has a profound effect on the way they write, a profound effect on the way they think. They won't reproduce your exact example, but they will produce something that scores very highly because of the key vocabulary that they've recognised makes up the answer. Another way to do it is just give them the topic sentences of each paragraph, maybe with a bit of key vocabulary afterwards, but the topic sentences will help them structure the answer and hopefully remember what went in each paragraph after the topic sentence. For example, if this were the topic sentence of my second paragraph, something in it would have to refer back to the end of my first paragraph. So I would get a clue as to how this preceding paragraph needed to end, because part of the vocabulary or the ideas would be reflected in this topic sentence. Okay, and then my final bit here, you can reconstruct from the structure. You could simply draw that. So imagine it's a newspaper article where you could draw in the columns, you could draw a space for each paragraph, you could draw a space for the picture, you might stick in, 10 words, 1 for each paragraph, and then they get to appreciate how the structure works. Or it might be an argument piece, in which case you would just do the first word of each paragraph and maybe each connective or each bit of punctuation in the paragraph. So paragraph 1 might be full stop, comma, full stop, exclamation mark, with a couple of keywords in there. So they're having to think about the structure of the writing. A final piece that I haven't done here is that you can do it as a close exercise, so that they miss particular words out. That's a really good way to get them to focus on what the key vocabulary was. And that old favourite, that DART activity where you chop up the paragraphs and get them to rearrange it. They're nice, they're slightly gimmicky, and I think these three are more important because they actually get students writing. And writing is the key if you're in a subject where writing needs to be done. Okay, and this is an advanced technique now. It's one that you won't be surprised to know that I use. Film stuff. Once you've decided what the model answer should look like and what you want the learning to be, film it. It's got so many advantages. It will make you very precise in your explanation, and it will allow you to edit it so that it tells your students exactly what you want it to. You will get to film how the model is constructed, which is very valuable to students. They get to see how you think rather than just read the model, which is just the end product of how you think. If they can see how you think, they will learn that much more from the model. You can then get them to watch the video that you've made and question them on it. They would then have to write an answer for homework, for example. So you might give them 7 questions, each from different parts of the video, to make sure they watched the whole thing. Obviously, I'm going to suggest to you that you get a YouTube account. The more videos you put up, the more your students will watch them, and the more you will force them to use the advice you're giving them. Because you will find that you prepare something brilliantly one year, and then the next year you can't quite remember exactly how you presented it, even though you've kept the resource. The great advantage of filming is it makes you think very clearly about what you want to say and how you want to say it. So it's your best teaching, and it's there for all time. You can use it for every single class when they come back to that topic again and again and again. So your teaching becomes timeless, it becomes easy, and most of all, your teachers don't need you anymore. Your students don't need you anymore. If you've had a bad day or a bad week, they can still get 100% because they've got access to your films on YouTube and they can teach themselves. So there you have it. You might have noticed I lost count between 9 and 10, but 10 progressively more and more effective ways to model and be explicit about your subject's literacy. I hope you found these useful, and drop me any comments if you need me to explain anything further or clarify anything, and good luck in your teaching.